Hey guys, Rafa here from the Endgame Investor, and today we're going to go into the witch doctor black magic mess that is the CPI. How is it calculated?
Raven's egg, blood of a hen, eyeballs of a crocodile, testicles of a newt.
What does it do? How is it manipulated? Why do people believe it? What is the meaning of prices? Is there a god of prices? Why is the CPI only rising 6.8% when it feels like it's rising a lot faster and things are getting way more expensive? Are the lockdowns somehow connected to CPI manipulation? Does it matter? All these questions and more answered, sort of, maybe, right now. Here is the BLS CPI homepage, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Here you will see in notices, it says here, starting in January 22nd, weights for the consumer price index will be calculated based on consumer expenditure data from 2019-2020. The BLS considered interventions, but decided to maintain normal procedures. Well, that is very encouraging. They're going to have normal procedures. Let's read more. January 2022 CPI weight update. Starting in January 2022, weights for the consumer price index will be calculated based on consumer expenditure data from 2019-2020. The BLS considered interventions, but decided to maintain normal procedures.
Do you ever have deja vu, Mrs. Lancaster?
I don't think so, but I could check with the kitchen.
I thought I wanted to read more, not the same. Okay, so the CPI is going to be reconfigured starting in February 2020, which is the January 2020 CPI report, for 2019/2020 spending patterns as opposed to 2017-2018 spending patterns. This is a routine change in how the CPI is constantly manipulated, but we don't know exactly how. Here, I will show you the 2017/2018 weightings for the CPI. These are the top 10 weighted categories of the CPI that it is currently based on for 2017-2018 spending data. Starting with the biggest component of the CPI, owner's equivalent rent of residences. What is owner's equivalent rent of residences? It's Fed interns calling up people, asking them what they would rent their house for if they rent it out. What do you think it would cost unfurnished without utilities? So these aren't even being rented. They're only pretend being rented. And that is the biggest component of the CPI, followed by 15.16% food, then medical care at 8.87%, rent of primary residence at 7.862%, which is about a quarter of or a third of owner's equivalent rent by weighting. New and used cars, 7.5%, 6.8% education, 5.8% recreation, and so on and so forth. All of these total together, 89.13%, so about 90% of the CPI is in these 10 categories. Now, how is owner's equivalent rent calculated? Let's go to this fun little sheet from, again, the BLS. All right, this is great. Price change for OER, owner's equivalent rent, and for rent. Blah, 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 blah. And we go to here. You have here a delta of a thingy and the A and the OER, and then the square root of the sixth root of the epsilon of something of pure rent of T and I and A all over epsilon I something UI. This all makes perfect sense. And this is how people live, apparently.
Today on How They Do It, plumbuses. First, they take the dinglebop and they smooth it out with a bunch of schleem. And the plubus and grumbo are shaved away. That leaves you with a regular old plumbus.
You see, the point here is when the government bureaucracies do something stupid, like include a price that doesn't actually exist in the consumer price index, as long as they make it into an equation that is impossible for anyone to understand, it's all fine. That's economics. If you think there's any common sense here, you're an idiot. Meanwhile, these geniuses who calculate owner's equivalent rent based on all these sixth root thingies that are going on in that equation that are supposed to intimidate us, what is being said about their methods. Here you have Mohammed El-Arian again, who has been ripping the Fed to shreds for its bad inflation calls, all those geniuses that have all those equations that calculate a meaningless, non-existent number to tell you how much prices are rising when the price of the thing that has the biggest weighting in the index that tells you prices are rising doesn't even exist. What does he say? Transitory inflation call, likely Fed's worst ever. The characterization of inflation as transitory, it's probably the worst inflation call in the history of the Federal Reserve.
Worst episode ever,
El-Arian said on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday. It results in a high probability of a policy mistake. So the Fed must quickly, starting this week, regain control of the inflation narrative and regain its own credibility. Otherwise, it will become a driver of higher inflation expectations that feed off themselves. El-Arian is exactly right. To call this the worst call ever from the Federal Reserve has a lot of competition, including Bernanke's calls that 2008 was contained, that subprime was contained. If this is worse than that, it's going to be pretty damn bad. In any case, this fake number that accounts for about a quarter of the CPI by weighting, more than any other single portion, you can see that it is starting to move higher. I guess the people that the Fed interns are calling are trying to raise their prices on things that they don't even get. Since in the last 2 months, October 2021 and November 2021, the index of owner's equivalent rent has moved up about 0.44% each month consecutively. That is the most that it has moved up in consecutive months since May and June 2006, which was the peak of the housing bubble that eventually resulted in the 2008 financial crisis. If owner's equivalent rent is moving up that fast, the CPI is about to move up pretty fast. And regarding what El-Arian said about the Fed having to chase price inflation higher, that is exactly the environment that we had from 1978 to 1980, when there was a bona fide, true dollar crisis, and the dollar was about to completely collapse. And the only thing that brought confidence back was the ability to jack interest rates higher, significantly higher than the CPI inflation rate, which was a lot truer back then because it calculated actual rent instead of owner's equivalent rent. Now, how much is the CPI going to be reconfigured? So we will simply compare the new table that comes out in February to the previous table for 2017-2018 weightings and see what is being manipulated. And as for all those equations with all those sixth root and epsilons and etc., I'm sorry, I'm not an economist. I don't understand this crap. I'm just a common sense logic guy, and that's it. My feeling is if they want to really mess with the CPI and push it lower, they're going to ascribe a much higher weighting to the owner's equivalent rent and install people at the other end of the phone to answer that they would just give away their houses if they wanted because they're so rich and they wouldn't charge any rent, and then the CPI would go way lower. Maybe that's how they're doing it. We'll see. And the only thing that really matters and what they can't lie about is food. Why? Because everybody buys food all the time, and you can only fool them so much. So in 2022, maybe the CPI as a whole will start to cool down because of the manipulation that is about to happen. But food prices, I can pretty much guarantee, are going to keep going higher and higher. There's nothing that the Fed or anyone else can do to stop it. Why? Is it that food's getting more expensive? No, it's that the dollar is dying. As for the final question, do the lockdowns have anything to do with suppressing CPI? Maybe, but the real answer is it doesn't matter. Let's say that the lockdowns are there to push the CPI lower so people think that consumer prices aren't rising as fast as they actually are, to sap demand, as they say. Well, imagine a complete and total lockdown where nobody is allowed to buy anything but food. So the prices of everything fall except for food, where all purchasing power is concentrated into food. Now, prices for the most basic necessities of life are rising extremely fast, whereas the prices of everything that nobody else is allowed to buy are falling because nobody can buy them. Do people think that there is no price inflation when their food bills are going higher and higher and higher and they can't afford to live anymore? No. You can't fool people on food prices because unlike almost anything else in life, all people buy food all the time, and they are more or less aware of what they're paying, especially when prices rise fast. This is Rafi, the Endgame Investor. Please like this video if you found it instructive. And I will be seeing you in the next few days. Hopefully we'll have a new interview up this week, getting deeper into the identities behind the gold and silver movements. Have a good one.